Okay, welcome to Letterform Lectures 2024. We host these informative talks 12 times a year to round out our Type West students' education. And speaking of Type West, we just graduated our type design classes of 2023, and their original typefaces are now available for viewing. Skilla, if you don't mind dropping the link to the students' website in the chat, then you guys can check out these killer typefaces. And if you can't get enough of their fonts, you can watch their amazing graduation videos. And maybe we can get Skilla to drop a link for that in the chat as well. Okay, here's a few things coming up on our agenda. Our next salon invites Jennifer Weisenfeld, who is the author of our stunning new book, The Complete Commercial Artist. Jennifer is going to be having a conversation with our editor, Chris Westcott, exploring modernist commercial design in Japan. In our workshop front, we have an incredible kinetic type workshop with Romello Goodman coming up in March. You will learn how to use HTML, CSS, and variable fonts to create animated type, and who knows, maybe even icons after you watch one thing today. This is a hands-on workshop. It should be super fun. Don't miss it. Finally, we have in our next Letterform lecture, Leah Spencer. She is the person who created the typography for Amazon's series set in the 1950s, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And this will give us a look at behind the scenes work that's necessary to create an authentic look for period film and TV. Do not miss this lecture. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so for more information about that and about our upcoming lectures, salon series, workshops, events, etc., go to letarc.org/events. And better yet, become a Letterform Archive member. Help keep great lectures like today's going. Okay, and finally, be sure to follow us on Instagram to stay on top of upcoming events and programs. Okay, we're coming up on the main event. Letterform lectures are co-presented by Letterform Archive and the SFPL Book Arts and Special Collections. Letterform Archive, as you may know, is a nonprofit institution housing over 100,000 works of graphic design history. We are dedicated to the art and the craft of the letterform. You can view all our lectures soon after they happen. Just check our website, letterformarchive.org. All right, here we have it. Font professional Wen-Ting Zhang, who is formerly at Adobe and now is the CEO of Typogram, will show us the latest developments in variable and color fonts and how to apply that technology to animate your icons. So Wen-Ting shared a funny story with us. She said that as an Eastern Asian language user, there's a phenomenon that's quite common. If you stare at a commonly used character for a very long period of time, and Wen-Ting didn't mention the use of drugs here, so we just have to imagine this is in the mind. You stare at it for a very long period of time, and it will suddenly look foreign, strange. And you wonder, is this really how it's been written all this time? It's a strange feeling, I imagine. And Wen-Ting also experienced this once with English, where she designed a display type that resembles a neon light tube, which sounds very cool, where the letter strokes are made out of one continuous tube. And she showed it to a peer of hers who looked at it for a little bit too long and finally asked, what was the idea to route the dot of the Q to the left side? Wen-Ting then realized that she had completely lost track of what that letter looks like. You know, it happens to the best of us. All right, without further ado, let's welcome Wen-Ting Zhang.
Hello, everyone. I'm Wen-Ting Zhang. Thanks for such a great introduction, and you told the story much better than I do. Today we're going to talk about animated and editable icons using variable fonts. It's funny that the workshop is coming up because I'm actually going to show you guys a little bit of CSS, like a little demonstration of how to customize icons using CSS, changing their colors, but not in the way that you might think. Okay, let me share my screen and get this started. Okay, so make icons editable, animated, and colorful with font technologies. A little bit about myself, like Randall introduced, I'm a designer, I'm an engineer, and I'm also an educator. Right now, I'm a CEO of Typogram. Check us out. I'm a very small startup and kind of grassroots, previously I worked as a staff engineer, staff experience designer at Adobe Fonts and Adobe XD. I also teach interaction design at School of Visual Arts. I did a bunch of public speaking all around the world. Only a lot of it is not about type, it's about CSS, which is kind of very, very integrated between the coding and the type design. Which is kind of the intersection of my career. So my main project, like I told you guys, is a typogram. It is a design tool for typography, for making letters look cool, for your logo, for your branding. I did just throw out something there. We recently integrated variable fonts, and I did a little dab on letter form on that upper word letter form, just, make it wonky, make it variable, which is alluded to what we are going to talk about today. I also have a bunch of side projects for you to check out. Today, we're going to mainly talk about Anycons, which is an icon set that is animatable and also colored using both variable fonts and color fonts. Here's just some work that I did before when I was at Adobe Fonts. This is a sample work that I did here. I'm just going to quickly scroll through them. This is called Font Pack, which you can kind of see the pairing between fonts. Let me actually just kind of skip ahead really quickly. There's also, I'm super proud of this work as well at Adobe, which I did the source sans serif website. See that little animation there? That's kind of my passion. Like, that's why I got super into animation, into animating icon. This one is not an animating icon, but it's using CSS to do, to make something delightful. Okay, let's get started. So before we kind of dive into the technical aspect of variable fonts and icons, I just want to, have this little journey through type innovations. And I see a common thread between these innovations, which I will tell you about. Initially, we started with metal type. The common thread I see all the innovations that type become more and more variable, which is alluded to the variable fonts. Initially, type is not variable at all. If you want a different size, even you need to have a different set of metal type. Everything was pretty set in stone or set in metal. And then we have photo typesetting, which uses this or a film to project type onto paper. And with this, we can vary the size more easily because we can use those magnifying lens turnip to magnify in, and that add a little bit of variability to font size. And then we have computer fonts, even though some people are very upon Rigby, which I meant the full bold and full italic, but it did introduce more font styles to the common user. Most fonts, because of computer fonts, even if they don't have bold or bold italic or italic, they add them by default because there's two buttons that a lot of people hate. So we get to know the RIBI, the regular italic, bold, and bold italic. So that adds more variability to the font styles. And finally, it comes the variable fonts, where everything is variable now. The font size can change endlessly, and also between font styles. Before we have regular and we have bold, now we can have halfway through between regular and bold, or 1/3, or anywhere between them, which is a lot of choices to think about. And more than that, more than just the standard axis of variable like width or weight, there's custom ones where you can define on your own. This particular font called Chi has 2 axes that is custom designed by the type designer. It doesn't exist in other fonts, just for this font. One is called Gravity, another one is called East. The more east you add to the breading, the puffer it gets. That's where the name comes from. That's how fun the custom axis can be. You can define anything you want. It can be anything that expressive, that really added to your creative expression. And now we're on to the other major star of this talk, which is icon. Icon, it is even older than text, letters. It came from ancient times, from the caveman's petroglyphs. Petroglyphs are these little drawings that was kind of packed onto the stone, and with the stones, the patina wears off. There's a different color that was shown that's a little bit lighter. That's the initial icon. We use icon to document what happened, part of our history. And that evolved into hieroglyphs, which is part of our early language. We use, this is kind of evolving into letters, into certain written systems like Eastern Asian, for example. The reason that I stare at a letter for too long, I lose track of what it looks like, because there were so many of them. You know, the commonly used Chinese letters, characters, there were 3,000 of them. So sometimes it is a little strange when you stare at one for longer period of time. And this glyphs is kind of in between icons and letters. It's evolving to be more and more abstract, you know, later on in history. But initially, you can kind of guess what they look like. For example, the mountain. Can you spot the mountain on the upper picture? It's pretty easy and simple. It's really resembled to the icons that we use today. And then we use more icons in our modern society, such as industrial icons, icons for traffic signs, for public information symbols. This is already ingrained in our society since forever, since the last century. And then comes this century where the internet icon becomes such a huge thing, the infamous hamburger icon. People hate about it because it's such a funny name, and why do we choose that? But it had become part of our culture now. Part of our writing system almost, and we understand what a hamburger icon means. It means a menu, and there's a bunch of their sibling icons like kebab, Oreo, candy box. We get used to them. We understand what they mean. They carry intrinsic meaning now, which is what letters and words are. And then emoji, that's even more ingrained, intertwined with our writing. We use emojis in our text messages, and they say a lot with a single character, a single glyph. And then we combine them together. We talk about how font evolves, and we talk about how icon comes to be. I want to kind of go into the more technical side of icons now, to kind of talk about why we want to combine icon with font. There were 3 major ways to produce an icon. The first way is to use PNG or SVG images. There's a second way, which is using CSS. I have this project of mine, which is drawing 500 different icons with CSS. It's a fun exercise of me. It is not as commonly used as PNGs or SVGs more often on the web because it's harder to produce. That's why I created this website, CSSicon.space, to kind of show people how to draw all these different icons using CSS. And related to CSS icon, it was hugely inspired by another project by someone else called CSS Sans. It is a typeface. A sans serif typeface that was also drawn entirely by CSS. So you can tell there were so many parallels between icons and fonts, like as if they're meant to be. We see the parallels between icons and letters in our history, And even like every day, like with small project, like I say, kind of they're intertwined, they're inspired by each other. And then the most popular way to produce icons or host icons on the website, on the internet, is to use an icon font. A Font Awesome is a very popular open source project that is it's called Font Awesome, but it's entirely for icon. But there are some challenges for icon font. The first challenge is icons are not always monotone, even though a lot of them are, but there are icons that are like two tones or multiple tones, or maybe, have two tones, but some of the layers are semi-transparent. Fonts, as we normally know them, they're single color. Of course, you can change text color from red to blue to any color, but they have to be a solid color. It doesn't host anything other than a solid color layer until some new technology that changed that. The static fonts, the regular fonts that we know it, only have one solid layer, and we can only control that layer to any color. We can control sub-layers into a different color. I want this layer to be fully blue, this layer to be semi-transparent red. We can't do that with traditional fonts. And also icon animation. Icon animation is huge on the internet. It is adding a little bit of delight, just like what I like to do as an engineer. Adding a little bit of animation, it is both visual and also functional sometimes to call your attention to the right place. It's a huge part of UX design. But animated icons is not so easy to do, especially with font. If you use font to host your icons, then not only is a solid layer, that layer doesn't normally change. So it's a static icon that can only have one color. So here, I want to introduce the first hero of the day, which is color fonts. Color fonts is, it can use multiple colors in a single glyph. It essentially have a layer system. Before, it only had one solid layer, and now it has multiple layers. You can apply color to each of the different layers. There are some standard for color fonts. Some of them are even more advanced than others, where it can support gradients. So not only they can separate into different layers, some of the layers actually can have a gradient as their color instead of a solid or semi-transparent color. So here, this is my project called Anycons. Anycons uses a color font for two-tone icons. It supports, this is only showing you a glimpse of what color fonts can do for icons. This is for two-tone. There's only two colors, but you can have multiple colors. You can have as many color layers as your design requires. And also, if you really want it, you can also use the other standard of color fonts to unlock gradients. Here, I want to show you a little quick demo of how to customize a color fonts. So here, it comes with some default palettes, which, poorly chosen. I wasn't super happy about it, but that's off the point, because once you get a hold of the font as the user, as a designer of the website, you can change it to whatever you want it. So here, we just need these two blocks of code, which is copy them into the CSS. The first one is to define the color palettes. And second one is applying that color palette to my icon preview. Here, I'm only changing it to a gray tone, which is more common, not to draw too many attention. And you can customize those two layers into any color, and even semi-transparent as well. And let's not forget about animations. We talk about how color fonts can answer the challenge of two-tone or multiple-tone color icons. But what about animating icons? Well, the most common way to animate an icon is to draw your icon with CSS and then animate them. Because they're individual HTML elements, you can use CSS animation to kind of morph them, change them, resize them, only limited to what CSS animation can do. You can, for example, animate the path data. The path itself cannot be animated. It needs to be a rectangular shape, and you can change the width and height. But if it is a organic shape, for example, you can morph that to another shape, which is possible with variable fonts. So CSS icons, since I draw those CSS icons using CSS, I added a capability where I can preview some very rudimental animation between icon sets. But as you can tell, this one is really just animating the rectangle width from narrow to wide. It doesn't accommodate too complicated of an animation. And here introduce the custom variable axis. Remember the tree font that I showed earlier, which is the example to show the power, the joy of custom axes. The custom axes are anything you want it to be as a type designer. And here I thought of a way, so since we can have gravity as an axis, we can have ease. Why don't we have an axis called time? Our world is a four-dimensional world, right? There's the fourth dimension, which is the time. Time by its nature is already an axis. Can we just make an axis for a variable font for time? And when you travel through that axis, it is the animation's timeline. So here I'm traveling through time to show you this animation between hamburger icons and 3 different set of icons. Let's play again. So with this very simple idea, we can create a bunch of animations using this custom axis. Here is a demonstration of the Anycons, the folder set to show you a more variety. Okay, let's play it again. So here, when you hover over it, this is still regular fonts, not color fonts, but it's animated. When you hover over them, I use the CSS to travel through the time axis from 0 to 100 and back when you hover out. And therefore, the animation was pre-packaged into the font itself, which is making it very easy for the developers of the website to use. It doesn't need any custom work when you design CSS animation, CSS icon animation. Everything needs to be very peculiarly put together so they can animate. It's actually more of a designer's job than a developer's job. But then because the work was in CSS, designers normally don't have access to that. It just become a very hard work for both parties. But if we can package the design of the animation into the font itself, which is something designer can totally control and deliver that to the developer, and everything, every nuance is already in the font itself. It's very well capsulated. And the developer can just unleash the power and use just one line of CSS and to showcase the animation. It's also much more organic because, like I said, it's give more power to the animation. It's not just resizing the width. It can be much more organic. There are more examples later on to showcase the power of that. So how to structure a variable font? Here, this is a glyph using the glyph software to kind of show you behind the scene of how to make, for example, a hamburger icon to change from the original shape to the cross to the close icon. The trick is that everything needs to be having the representation in the beginning and also in the end. So everything needs to match. Something cannot just magically shows up or magically disappear. They all have to be accounted for in each of the frame. So for example, in the close icon, there's only 2 strokes, but hamburger icon has 3 strokes. Notice that in the center, the number 3, it was there, but it was shrank to be minimal size. It was hidden be at the cross between 2 and 1. So that's how I make the middle stroke disappear after animated. They still have to be there physically. It's just appearance-wise or hidden away. We can add as many, I would say, keyframes. If you're more familiar with motion graphics, all these numbers, 15, 13, 33, they are keyframes to annotate the animation. Of course, the easiest one, you only have the origin and the card target. That's cool. But most of the animation need more nuance, need more in between to make them look beautiful and organic and intuitive. So you can add in between stop point keyframes to control the path to animate from the origin to the target. How do they disappear? What paths do they travel through to end up where they should be? So this is a typical structure of a variable fonts. What about color fonts? So this one doesn't have as many keyframes, but it shows that it has the original, it has the target, which is the variable axis. I designated origin to be time 1 and the target to be time 100. So the range is between 1 and 100. And we travel between them. Anywhere in between, the computer is doing interpolation between those two frames to decide where it should land. And at the same time, for each of the keyframe, there were 2 layers. Think about motion graphics and using After Effects. There's a timeline, which is the axis of time for us in variable fonts. Here it was vertically laid out, but think of that as kind of like it matches with the horizontal timeline of After Effects. And if we have multiple keyframes, they're vertically laid out, but that is corresponding to the timeline, the in-between keyframes in the After Effects timeline. And under each of those, under each of the keyframe, you can have color layers. So you can have multiple layers. For any color, it's simply it's only supposed to support 2-tone color. So we have 2 layers, color 0 and color 1, which, if you remember the CSS, it corresponds to the CSS, the palette setting. I have 0 and I have 1. If I have more layers, and then I can refer to those layers by the number that I designated here and apply different colors to each one of them. So here, just want to give you a fuller view of any icon's color. When I hover over it, I'm going to play this multiple times, happen really quickly. I can customize the color, and all these kind of icons on here is both color fonts as well as variable fonts. So they have both power. Let's play it again. And some of the animation here, you can see is much more organic, like the Z, the snooze icon there. It was almost impossible to do without variable fonts. With CSS example, I don't think that it's either extremely hard to do, not worth it, or impossible to have the same high fidelity of animation. And notice that for the second layer, I actually add transparency to it. That's why the blue is so much lighter. And lastly, I want to talk about editable icons. Editable icons is kind of the same idea. Think about like we have the time axis to make any animation, but the more commonly used variable custom axis is to change the appearance of the letters. And for us, it's for icons. There is already a lot of needs on the market right now for designers to customize the icon set. So you normally get an icon from a pre-packaged set. They look okay. Material icons, for example, there's a lot of free sets out there, but maybe it just lacks some customization. For your website, for your look, you may want to change certain aspect of the icon. A common request is to change the stroke width, which is easy to do if you're using SVG as the host media for your icon. This website called shape.so, it allows you to customize the stroke width. So how skinny each of those lines are, it can be changed from 0.5 pixel to 2 pixel to 4 pixel. It has a very narrow range to make sure it still looks good in the current setting, but there are limited customization possibilities that is offered by SVG icon sets. Which is to say that there's a lot of needs for customize the look of our icon, because editing an icon or creating an icon from scratch to make sure the appearance of the icon is to your liking is actually a lot of skill required. Some people don't have the time. Some people don't have the skill. For Typogram, which is a logo design software, we try to make icon much more customizable to common users. You don't have to learn Bezier curves to manipulate them. We use variable fonts to unlock a certain level of customization for each of the icons. Here, I'm showing you a standard heart icon. If you search heart icon on non-project, you're going to get 1,000 of them. Each of them look a little bit different because there are different shapes, there's different aspect ratio. Maybe it's wider than it's tall. Maybe it was how angular it is. If we empower variable icon, we can use 2 sliders to control how that icon looks like to fit more into your design. For example, here, I'm choosing a little bit squares. Look at the O of the typogram, the letter O is square, it's not perfectly round. So I want a icon that is kind of in between the full roundness and the angular one, kind of in between to kind of mimicking the look of the type. So using variable fonts allow us to make a set of icons that is editable, which can replace thousands of icons that is on non-project, and it also give you that control. You search for icon library, you can get 1,000 icons, and you can pick one that is suited for you. But a variable icon can replace so many possibilities. All the in-betweens, each individually, they're an icon of itself, and that variance can be controlled easily also. So I think that's a really great idea to add a little bit of customization to your icon set. Here's another example of a variable icon. Most of our icons have a common access code ratio, just because the most common use case for our platform to use icons, to use icon to replace a certain part of the letter, and that shape can be in different width and height ratio. So we want to make sure that we can accommodate that. So each of the icon, you can change the ratio from like super wide to super tall. For example, if you want to use the icon to replace the letter I, that is skinny, that is a landscape view. So you can use a very low aspect ratio of that icon configuration to replace that. Here's another example of an Earth icon, which is, this one is we created by using alternative glyphs in the same variable icon, because for the icons, you may want to have show your country to be the center of the map. So we have 4 different map centers. So they are the same variable fonts, but we use 4 different glyphs to map these 4 different variants. So they're not variable variants, but they're still adding more customization to your icon. So you can choose between Europe being the center, or America continent, Africa continent, or Asia continent to be the center of the map. Okay, so that's what I have for today. I'm opening up for questions and answers. I also want to give a shout out to where you can find me, or contact me later on. I wrote a newsletter for my journey as a Typogram founder. So you can subscribe to my newsletter at build.typogram.co. I'm also on Twitter as @designjokes. Also check out Typogram. I would really appreciate that. All right. Open for.
All right, Wenting, thank you so much. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. So everybody, please put your questions for Wenting in the Q&A, and I will try to type the answers as we go along. So first question comes from Penina Wenting. Is it possible to use the tool to export the animation as an embeddable file?
Yes, the embeddable file would be a font. It can be a TTF font or Wolf 2. So yes, the answer, that's the beauty of this technology, is that you don't have to have some snippets of HTML and CSS or sometimes even JavaScript to make animation happen. It's not very encapsulated that way because everything was kind of scattered in different places. It's add more work to the maintainer of the animation. If something broke, if something needs to change, there are multiple places you need to update to make sure it is up to the new look. But with the variable font, everything is just a font. You just get a font and you put on, just like hosting your web fonts. This particular font is for your icon set. So you can also map all the different icons into different glyphs. So for example, you can have hamburger icon for letter A slot. You can have like the bell icon for letter B. So you can map it out and just type out those letters and apply the font. Then that letter is not looking like a letter A anymore. It becomes the hamburger icon. And then that hamburger icon is animatable. It is recolorable because it's a variable color font. So just a single file. It looks like just every single other font file, except it just has so much information embedded in it. Font is actually a really magical format that we didn't realize it because we just see this surface of it, which renders the letters, renders the icons, but they have so many other hidden information embedded in the font. For example, the OpenType features, a lot of people don't know that exist. You get a letter A, but in that same font, there may be like 5 to 10 alternative look or rendition of that letter A for swatches, for ligature, for all kinds of usage. It's just hidden away that people don't know. I think a font is a very unexplored format for digital assets. That's my opinion.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for that answer, Wenting. Let's see. Doug asks, what software do you use to create typefaces and icons?
Oh yeah, so I share a little bit of screenshots. It's using the glyphs software. It's called the glyphs app. It's not the only software that can do that. There are other software like RoboFonts can also support variable fonts. I use both for variable fonts and color fonts. I find glyphs, at least when the time that I first tried them, has much better support. It's also because it is a new technology and the software is trying to catch up. Not all places support them equally. I think Glyphs team did a really great job in documenting how things work. For example, I mentioned that there are different substandards for color fonts. So for example, like Microsoft can come up with their color font format standard, and Adobe may have their own, Google may have their own. They have different capability as well. Some of them supports gradients, some of them don't, only support like different layers. Glyphs team did a really great documentation on how to choose which one can be better supported. Just spend a lot of time kind of maintain the community and inform everyone about the latest. Because sometimes the information is really scarce and hard to find. I recommend checking them out. I also recommend checking out RoboFonts, even though I didn't use that particular software to produce any costs. It has a lot of great resources there as well. And I believe they later on come up with a new version that's much better than the version that I use that has better support for variable fonts and color fonts.
Okay, thank you so much. This is great for our type design students because they're learning both of those programs. Um, okay, Chris Wilmore asks, right now, all interpolation between masters in OpenType is performed linearly, as far as I know. Is there anything in the works to allow something like rotation-based interpolation rather than having to add lots of keyframes to build a rotation out of linear interpolations?
Oh, that's a very insightful question because when I was working on Anycons, this Anycon project, by the way, is commissioned by Google Fonts. So I get to talk to a lot of the experts there at Google Fonts. So I asked them, they also give me requests and feedback, for example, rotation being one of them. Initially, the animation that I come up with try to avoid rotation as much as possible for the reason that you mentioned, Chris, where rotation that's actually a strong suit for CSS because for CSS, as long as the shape was defined, rotating them is not a problem. But in variable fonts, in the traditional way that we design variable fonts, it is much harder because there's no rotation defined. You can't really define, oh, I want to rotate from 0 degree to 180 degree. There's no such thing. So you actually have to define the pathway to mimic that rotation. So it's something that actually get a little bit wonky in between. Even though I didn't use the feedback that I got from Google Fonts, but I heard from them that I believe they mentioned a project by Underwell Type that they experiment with variable fonts that can do rotation in a particular way. So I recommend checking them out. I can't really get into that because I actually we didn't use that. We didn't use that to do rotation. Our rotation in any cons was just done linearly, like you said. But I believe there are ways to go around it. More to learn. There's so much to learn in variable fonts.
Okay, I see more questions coming. Put them in the Q&A, you guys. I see them popping up in the chat. Let's see them in the Q&A where I can type the answer. Okay, GW has a technical question. Many type designers make sure to keep bezier curves horizontal vertical and place control points on the extrema of a shape. Do you do the same when working with variable fonts, or is it best to ignore that tradition?
I think so. I still follow them as much as I could. There are times where I have to break rules to make a certain animation happens. Because each of the anchor points need to match up. So I mentioned that in the screenshot that I show, for each of the shape, they need to be accounted for in each of the keyframe. So for example, in the beginning, there is a hamburger icon. In the end, it becomes just two stroke, a close icon. One of the stroke magically disappear. And not only that, each of the anchor point need to match up as well, and the order of it. So there's a lot of very particularly you have to keep track where everything's are, and they have to all exist. So in between the keyframes, it is not possible to keep the extrema vertical, horizontal at the extreme, as you can imagine, because I'm trying to animate them. If I try to move them to the extrema, then the in-between will be messed up because there's a lot of wonky shape because anchor points they are matching up perfectly. So they need to move. As their way to move to the target from the origin, they can't always be on the extrema. So in that case, for the in-betweens, I don't follow them. But for the extreme, not extrema, but for the origin and target, I try to follow them. The rule really applies to static design of the font outline. So you still follow the best practice when you draw the static frame, the keyframes, the extreme keyframes from the beginning point and end point, or rather in the beginning point, because you can't really anticipate where the end kind of shows up. But you also draw more than one original point. Sometimes in between, you have to switch. That's another thing I didn't mention. It's not always the same set of glyphs. In between, there's an option where you can secretly switch to an entirely new set of shapes and anchor points. That is commonly referred as the dollar sign problem, where the dollar sign, normally there's a one continuous stroke in the center of the S, but when it gets super heavy and bold, there's not enough space in the center in the counter to give room to the heavy stroke. So it was separated into two stroke. So you can switch glyphs essentially. So for example, at a certain axis value, like for the time between 1 and 100, maybe halfway there, the design actually need to change. So I switched to alternative glyph at that point to render the remainder of the axis. So for each of those original point of each of the segments, I try to follow the extrema rule, but not in between.
Okay. The dollar sign problem, huh? Okay. That totally makes sense. Hugo asks, what metrics do you use for icon fonts? I've read an article on the glyphs docs where they recommend using regular font metrics, 1,000 units tall, set cap heights, X height, etc. Do you use those same metrics?
Oh, I love the question from the audience because it's so it is so nitty-gritty. It's so into the thing that it kind of give me a little flashback of the time that I spent working on this project years ago. So there's a point in time where I have to decide, obviously, about the unit system. For any cost, we did not use 1,000 units. And also the 1,000 is just common for fonts. A lot of fonts use other values such as 2048 as example. Because I deal with fonts every day with typogram, I know there's a lot of weird cases and also like font metrics not entirely correctly set. So I know all the quirky and edge cases. So 1,000 is not by any standard like the default. It's not even the default. It's just more common. For any cons, because it was a commissioned project by Google Fonts, so I have to base it off on material icon. The material icon, the static design of it is already there. It was in increments of 24 pixels. So it's either 24 pixel or 48 pixel. So in order to recreate the design faithfully, I create a grid system by 240. So I magnify by 10. So change from 24 to 240. And there's another question. So now I know my inbox is 240 by 240. There's also another question on where to set the baseline within that inbox. Because the icon doesn't have a visible baseline, unlike letters. The baseline is very prominent by the foot of the letter A, the letter X, all the flat phi letters really make that line, that invisible line more less visible. But for icons, it's a little vague. So I choose a number so I create a grid system within the 240 by 240, where the icon is going to be in the center. And it's also not occupying fully the entire space. There's usually a little space, kind of the side bearings, if you will, on both on the left and right, also on top and bottom, because the icon is mostly a square-ish shape. It's occupy the center. So I chose a baseline position that is going to place the icon in the center if it was paired up with a font, for example, if that makes sense. So it's kind of sitting on that baseline. So the icon is not like right on the baseline, but the baseline was chosen so that the icon, when laid aside with a text, it looks vertically centered with the design of the letter. So that's some consideration.
That sounds awesome. And I'm glad you're enjoying the questions. These are from people who've taken the type design course with us. So they clearly have a lot of nitty gritty details they need addressed.
I love them. I love them.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, people. Let's drop them. We have a few more minutes, and we'd like to grill Wenting while she's available here. So if anybody had any questions in the chat that you'd like to see addressed, please put them in the Q&A. Going once, going twice. Okay, let's give them a few more minutes to try to put some more details in here if there are any more open questions. Otherwise, you put your contact information in the chat too, right, Wenting? So people can get a hold of you later if they have a burning question that comes up.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
Let's see.
we'll put my contact info in the chat.
It's possible Skilla already did, but you could do it right now. There we go. All right, Wendy at typogram.co. Perfect.
And this is my newsletter URL. And also I'm at Design Jokes on Twitter.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, people. Much appreciated to everybody who joined us today. And thank you so much, Wenting. This was fantastic. Don't forget, folks, to tune in a couple weeks for our next Letterform lecture. And until then, thank you so much again, Wenting, and everybody in the audience today.
Awesome.
Have a great
rest Thank you for
day.
hosting.
You
Had
got
so
it.
much fun talking to you guys. I love the questions.
They were definitely excellent and put you on the hot seat.
I love that seat. All right. Thank you.